In late 2018, criminals in Australia began to shell out upwards of $2,000 for the latest in digital technology. And no, it wasn't for the latest iPhone or Samsung, but for a device called Anom, a hardened device that promised unhackable encryption, guaranteed to keep any and all messages far from the prying eyes of governments and law enforcement agencies. By 2019, criminals in more than 100 countries were relying on the device to run drug operations, launder money, and even plan murders. But what they didn't know was that every one of the more than 27 million messages sent on the phones was being read and cataloged by the secret organization behind the device, the FBI. And the fallout would be extraordinary. This is the story of Operation Trojan Shield, the largest sting in FBI history. In 2018, the San Diego branch office of the FBI helped shut down Phantom Secure, a company that distributed encrypted communication tools like phones to known criminal organizations.
What those Phantom Secure cell phones were BlackBerry smartphones, which had many of their inner workings removed.
Those organizations then used the devices in all sorts of criminal enterprises without risk of being intercepted by law enforcement. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of California prosecuted Phantom Secure CEO Vincent Ramos and other executives on charges of facilitating the transnational importation and distribution of narcotics. In other words, drug trafficking. But the feds knew that as soon as one secure communications network went down, another would show up to fill the void. And you'll never believe this, but once Phantom Secure went down, its extra legal subscribers jumped to similar services, including EncroChat. But there was something they didn't know. Just before Phantom Secure went defunct, higher up within the company, known only as AFGU, created a similar phone service. AFGU knew they'd be facing hefty punishment for their involvement with Phantom Secure, so they went to the FBI with a deal. For a reduced prison sentence, they'd hand over their entire encrypted communications system, called Anom. And that wasn't all AFGU had to offer. They had access to Phantom Secure's entire subscriber base. The FBI took the deal and ran with it in a brilliant strategic move, taking over the development and the operation of the new, believed to be unhackable service. After AFGU built a backdoor into the encryption software, the FBI and the Australian Federal Police gave it a test drive. AFGU gave Anom-enabled phones to underworld figures in Australia. They used the devices to arrange crimes, and the FBI was watching the whole time. Meanwhile, the Australian criminals were so thrilled with Anom that they spread the word about the phones across their criminal networks.
They openly marketed them to other potential users as designed by criminals, for criminals.
The interested parties contacted AFGU to place large orders of phones that had been stripped of all features and functions except the encrypted communications software.
We're talking about removing the phone's camera, removing the GPS tracker, even removing the USB port.
It may sound like it's bordering on entrapment, but since the FBI didn't try to persuade their targets to buy the phones, they were in the clear. It was AFGU who provided the devices, and word spread through the underground grapevine in a kind of person-to-person viral marketing scheme. The FBI and AFGU started by outsourcing the installation of Anom to a low-key electronics firm located in Hong Kong. But when demand for the service spiked after EncroChat was busted and shut down, the Bureau hired Dutch distributor Vijay, who was soon making 15 Anom-enabled phones at a time. Over 18 months, more than 12,000 Anom devices were sent around the world, used by 300 criminal syndicates in more than 100 countries. With Phantom Secure and EncroChat out of the picture, along came Sky to fill the void.
The product of Sky ECC gave power back to users, to individuals.
But Sky was charging up to $2,000 for 6 months of service, while Anom wanted just $600. Apparently, even criminals can be thrifty, and Anom became the underworld service of choice. Among the early adopters of Anom was Sweden-based crime boss Maximilian Rivkin, codenamed Microsoft, which reflected his use of technology to run his empire. In 2020, Rivkin traveled to Istanbul, Turkey to meet with Hakan Ayik, head of a dangerous cartel that trafficked drugs into Australia. Ayik was looking to expand into the European market, so he recruited Rivkin, and by extension, Rivkin's entire network. Together, they advocated hard for Anom while trashing Sky, with a warning that it was likely to get compromised because it was based in Canada. Now, Canada isn't known for being the best at intelligence gathering or anything, but Rivkin, with his entrepreneurial mindset, thought Anom was a cash cow. He liked the idea so much that he stole the machines used to make the phones from Vijay. Of course, he had no idea that he was effectively going into business with the FBI, who were watching the whole thing. By 2020, the Anom sting was almost working too well. The feds were inundated with intel about crimes, committed and in the making. Thanks to their backdoor into the software, the Bureau could tell where phones loaded with Anom were located, so they began to tip off local authorities across Europe as the dirt came rolling in. And thanks to the European bad actors' belief that Anom's encryption was unbreakable, they talked about absolutely everything. Cops broke up crime rings and illegal operations seemingly out of nowhere. In Sweden alone, the FBI says that 12 murders were prevented because authorities used Anom data to shut down various criminal operations, including a meth ring known as the Firm.
This is a watershed moment in global law enforcement history.
And that's not an understatement. By the sheer volume of people involved and arrests made, June 8, 2021 may go down as the biggest single-day bust of all time. Everyone taken into custody had basically ratted on themselves over Anom, but the sting had been running smoothly. Lives were being saved and crimes were being thwarted on an ongoing basis. So why did Operation Trojan Shield, as it came to be known, have to come to an end? Simply put, high-level criminals aren't stupid, and they were beginning to suspect someone was listening. In March 2021, a self-proclaimed online privacy and security advocate going by the handle, can you guess 67, posted to a blog called Anom Exposed, writing, "In my findings and questioning of many individuals out there, I ascertained, aside from Anom being a total scam and a complete setup, that not everyone who uses a secure handset is actually a so-called criminal. Many are simply just privacy-conscious individuals with no understanding of technology." The blogger pointed out that a high number of IP addresses related to Anom corresponded with those of government offices known to readily share intel with one another, namely the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and in fact, Canada, known as the Five Eyes countries. It was a big red flag. There was also the matter of the legal time clock. Anom was so popular that it required multiple large servers across the world in order to function correctly. This meant the FBI had to contract with other countries to strategically place those devices. In some locations, that requires a warrant or other legal permission from local governments, which is only valid for a certain period of time. One of the warrants expired on June 7, 2021, making any data collected from that server later inadmissible. The next day, June 8th, was the day of reckoning for Operation Trojan Shield.
The very devices that the criminals used to hide their crimes were actually a beacon for law enforcement.
Operation Trojan Shield was created to help disarm major global criminal enterprises, including large-scale drug production, trafficking, and money laundering. Once a federal grand jury indictment was unsealed in San Diego, site of the FBI branch office that spearheaded the sting, more than 500 people were arrested, from Australia to Europe and beyond, all for crimes talked about on Anom. If we add in the arrests made before June 8th, more than 800 people were detained by local police agencies around the world as a result of the operation. Around 12,000 Anom-enabled phones were distributed over the length of the project, and 9,000 were still in use at the time of the sting. As a result, the FBI intercepted more than 27 million messages and spied on more than 300 criminal groups, including gangs, drug smugglers, and Italian organized crime outfits. Officials seized more than 8 tons of cocaine, including half a ton from just Finland, 2 tons of amphetamines, 6 tons of materials used to make those drugs, and $48 million in assorted cash. It was a major win for the good guys. Operation Trojan Shield was initiated and executed by the FBI, obviously a US agency, but not one US citizen was arrested in the sting. So how is this possible? It's a case of one set of laws colliding with another, which can be a good thing, or in this case, not exactly. See, in the US, there are strict privacy laws protecting citizens from government surveillance. It falls under the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which prevents unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. In other words, if law enforcement wants to listen in on an American citizen, they need to show probable cause and specifically describe the place to be searched and the items to be seized before obtaining a warrant to go ahead. This extends to online privacy, which meant Operation Trojan Shield's wide net was too wide to catch any metaphorical American criminal fish. It would be against the law. Operation Trojan Shield was particularly impactful in the Netherlands, resulting in the arrests of 49 Dutch people. In addition, 25 drug-related locations identified through Anom communications were raided and shut down. 8 guns, a high volume of drugs, and 2.3 million euros in cash were seized. The Dutch wing of Operation Trojan Shield was so efficient because of the involvement of the National Police Unit, which specializes in cybercrime. They actually built dedicated software for the op in order to quickly and effectively analyze the millions of Anom messages. The unit then handed over all that information to other European law enforcement agencies and members of Europol. The largest section of suspected criminals arrested with the conclusion of Operation Trojan Shield came from Australia, where it was called Operation Ironside. From the June 2021 bust to June 2024, the Anom collected intel led to 392 people who were charged with a grand total of 2,355 individual offenses. The bulk of the charges were for money laundering and drug trafficking, and the resulting convictions led to a total of 307 years of prison time. On the day of the coordinated international bust, authorities in Australia caught 224 suspects and confiscated more than 100 guns and $45 million in cash. Anom users in Australia had made business arrangements with organized crime units in Italy and throughout Asia, as well as with motorcycle gangs and global drug trafficking rings. In Australia alone, police were able to thwart 21 potential murders. In nearby New Zealand, 57 Anom-equipped phones were in operation over 18 months. When the sting went into effect, 35 arrests and $3.7 million worth of crime-related assets, vehicles, guns, drugs, and cash were seized. With the help of the F.B.I. and Europol, German police made upwards of 70 arrests in June 2021 as a part of Operation Trojan Shield. This involved searches of over 150 separate locations in Germany, focused almost entirely in the state of Hesse and its capital Wiesbaden. About 1,500 German law enforcement officials participated in raids of dozens of warehouses, offices, and private residences, the locations of which were determined by tracking prepaid phones loaded with the Anom messaging service. Altogether, on June 8, 2021 alone, German officials confiscated 20 weapons, 30 vehicles, computer equipment, 250,000 euros worth of cash, and several hundred pounds of illegal narcotics. Of the 50 drug labs broken up by Operation Trojan Shield's operatives, the one in Germany was one of the largest on record in that country's history.